an extraordinary and quite successful audio drama with a large following on all the major audio platforms all over the world. And tonight, we're going to bring Palimpsest into the visual realm. We present a dramatization of Season 3's last episode. Seasons 1 and 2, in their entirety, are now available online, but each episode is a story unto itself. So what is it? Well, here come some clues. It's an audio drama about memory, identity, and the things that haunt us. Anytime we remember, we're talking about ghosts. The series explores the spaces between horror, fantasy, and psychological realism, a masterclass in atmosphere. Black Mountain's own Jamieson Ridenhour is the creator, writer, and the producer. Haley Henninger is the creator and actor. Music is by Ian Ridenhour, and Megan Lee is the graphic designer. White Horse Live is proud indeed to present on stage for the first time, Palimpsest.
The house sits in the middle of its street, surrounded by green. The street is in a quiet neighborhood, close enough to the town or city or the village to go when you need, but far enough away that it feels like a small world of its own. The people who live on the street live quiet lives. Even though they're friendly, they mostly keep to themselves. You like that. It's been a long year and you'd rather be alone. You don't remember the house, though you feel sure you must have walked this street before. You've lived here all your life, and surely you'd remember this place. But only now, running from your broken relationship, or your broken family, or your broken job, your whole broken past, really, do you really see it? There are stone steps from the street, crumbling around the edges but solid overall. Just like me, you say, joking, but there's no one there to hear you. You fall quiet, a little embarrassed, as if you had told a joke at a funeral. At the top of the steps, the ground slopes up toward the house, a wide expanse of grass, even and soft, mown, but not so close-cropped that you can't imagine the feel of it on your feet. So much that you long to slip your shoes off, wiggle your toes amongst the blades. But again, the thought embarrasses you a little. You walk. The yard is overshadowed, in a very literal sense, by a huge oak tree to your right. It's roughly halfway between the street and the house, tall and spreading. At this time of year, the leaves are just beginning to turn, deepening towards scarlet against the sharp blue of the sky. It's nearly twice the height of the house. How old does a tree have to get to be that tall? You pause beside it, gazing up into the branches. 10 feet up, a large branch forks off of the main trunk, and a few feet along its length, you can see the remnants of 2 ropes. They are tied 2 or 3 feet apart, thick, sturdy rope, each hanging down like vines before fraying to an end after 15 or 16 inches. An old rope swing, perhaps. How long ago was that? You wonder how many lives have passed through this place. And then suddenly, you have a vision. No, more than a vision. A vivid waking dream. You see the yard and the tree in a bright technicolor wash, and see that it was indeed a swing, with a wooden seat attached to 2 long ropes. There is someone you can't quite see in the seat, and they're swinging toward you in the hammer film light. You raise your arms, bracing for the impact, And then you are back in the ordinary air, watching the old broken rope swaying slightly in the breeze. Is that a fading breath of laughter? Or just the wind through the leaves? Best go in now. There is a porch across the front of the house, and steps that lead up to it. Beside the steps are flower beds, empty now that summer is fading, but well tended and ready for the cold. There must be a caretaker. Someone loves and tends to this place. The porch creaks as you mount it. It is cool under its roof. The shades are drawn in the downstairs windows, but you think you catch a shimmering movement out of the corner of your eye, a furtive shift, as if someone dropped a curtain just as you looked. Maybe the weird daydream by the tree is still hovering, playing tricks. There is a welcome mat, but it's too faded to read. The door is painted a bright green, and in the center is a brass knocker shaped like a cat with a fiddle. The cat's face is somehow off-kilter, its smile too wide, and you stop yourself before lifting the knocker. Even though you know full well you're expected, you wonder if it might be better not to announce your arrival, not just yet. The doorknob turns easily in your hand, and you're standing in the foyer. There are doors to either side, and a large sweeping staircase leading to a mezzanine above you at the back of the space. A grandfather clock stands sentinel against the wall opposite the stairs. The floor is hard wood, old but clean and polished. The walls have a fresh coat of paint, a pale blue like a robin's egg, and you can still smell the paint and turpentine. You are surprised by how fresh it appears, that a house this old could clean up so well. But even as you think this, you begin to notice small marks, imperfections and accidental marrings. They're subtle, but you can't unsee them once they've been noticed. There is a blue and red floor runner in the front of the door, and from beneath one corner, you see the faint outline of a stain spilling out. It's lighter than the floor, except for the curving edge, which is a dark red approaching black, like the photo negative of a chalk outline. Smaller stains, like footprints, mark a path toward the door on your right. There is a mark on the wall halfway up the stairs, a place where the plaster has been shattered, leaving a crater an inch across. The paint beneath is a deep red that shows against the robin's egg like a drop of blood in snow. The loudest thing in the foyer is the ticking of the grandfather clock, but underneath you catch a snatch of something else. It's behind the door to your left. Leaning close to the brass keyhole, it becomes clearer. Someone is crying in that room. Deep, grieving sobs that form a throbbing fist in your throat. Sadness rolls through the door like a tide, and you know you can't go in that room yet. The door across the hall is unlocked, and you trail through the empty rooms beyond, trying to forget the crying woman behind the other door. The furniture here is covered by sheets, like in an old movie, the shapes at once strange and familiar, like returning to a childhood home long after another family has lived it into difference. The fireplace is empty, but you can smell old smoke, mixed with a coppery smell that tastes like pennies in your mouth. A picture frame is face down on the mantel, but you can't bring yourself to turn it over. Somehow you know who's memorialized behind that cracked glass, and once again, you're not ready. It's still early, and you know you've got time. Further in, you come upon the bathroom, where the wallpaper is faded from years of steam, and someone has left a single muddy footprint in the tub. On the edge of the sink is a friendship bracelet, woven out of black and red string, faded with age and still knotted. It has been neatly cut in two by something sharp. You reach to pick it up, but are distracted by a noise from behind you before you touch it. The noise, a shuffling movement like someone silently dancing, came from the room at the back, which is bare of furnishings. Its windows are uncovered, and you squint a little in the late afternoon sunlight slanting through the wavy glass. You cross the floor and peer out the back window. The backyard is green and expansive. You can't quite see the far end of it. It trails away into haze and the gleam of what looks like light on water. Directly below the window is a garden plot full of autumn gourds, all orange and yellow. Among the vines are 3 piles of earth, vaguely oblong, each around 5 feet long, where the ground has been dug and filled in. A single rose has been laid on each one. The yard is empty, and the impression you have of a tall man kneeling in the dirt to your left must surely have been an illusion. In another room, you find a door to the basement. The steps are old, much older than anything else you've seen, roughly cut from stone and descending sharply into darkness. The cold, dry air that creeps from the yawning black smells of dirt and dust. The push-button light switch doesn't work. Either a bulb is burnt out or the wiring is bad. You close the door and go back out to the foyer and up the stairs. The landing is a miniature version of the foyer. 2 doors, one on either side, and 15 feet of hardwood between them. There are deep scratches in the floor here, parallel marks gouged into the floor like something heavy has been dragged across the wood. Or like claws. The doors here have small brass plates screwed into the plaster. Long ago they had words etched on them, but all that remains now is the faintest of suggestions, enough to tease. The doors, like the ones downstairs, are of oak, and you'd like to show them to someone, to say, "Look at this. Isn't this beautiful?" But you know the person you'd most like to show it to is far out of reach now. Even before you came in the house, they wouldn't have heard you. The sobbing from downstairs has gotten louder now, and weirdly, you have a clearer sense of who's behind that door, why they can't stop crying. There is a feeling in your chest like a corkscrew twisting slowly into the meat of your heart. You open the door on your right. The rooms here mirror the ones below, but the furniture is odd. There are only chairs, lined against the wall by the dozen, chairs of all kinds and ages. Simple wooden chairs, ladder-back department store chairs, overstuffed easy chairs, velvet-covered straight-back chairs like little thrones, and one tiny chair, made perhaps for a child, but draped in blue and green cloth. The sunset through the old glass falls on this little chair like a spotlight, and for a moment you smell flowers. Jasmine, you think. But then a cloud passes over the setting sun, and the smell fades with the light. The 2 other rooms up here are similarly filled with old furniture. Chests of drawers and bed frames and glass-top tables and paintings all stacked and piled. It feels like the backstage of a theater or a workroom in a museum. Some of the pieces here are very, very old, and some are factory floor new. On the floor are piles of old things, shoeboxes full of paper, dog collars, puzzles, little books and knickknacks. A small pearl-handled gun and an old cap dyed a deep red. There's a roll of butcher's paper and a broken CD player. A shovel with fresh dirt on the blade. When you enter the furthest room, you are certain a woman in a white dress is standing against the wall to your left, facing away from you, her head laying in her raised arm. But when you startle and turn toward her, there are only shadows. You hear a snatch of music fading on the air. You leave the way you came in. You cross the mezzanine to the other door. There are nails driven in the threshold here. You can see them silver against the dark wood. As you look at them, something moves behind the door in front of you. It's a slow, sliding sound, like someone is dragging something heavy and wet, and simultaneously you hear a sigh behind you. It's just over your right shoulder, a sound of resigned sadness, of a woman accepting defeat. You feel a puff of breath against your ear, but when you turn, you're alone in the mezzanine. But not quite alone. Not really. You can feel the weight of history here, of others who have stood where you now stand. Layers of the past, rippling like water in a grotto, exposing glimpses of other people, other places, other times, other tragedies. There is a word for that, you remember. Over the railing, you see something lying on the floor of the foyer below you. It's a small rectangle of colored paper. You move down the stairs, past the bullet hole in the wall, into the foyer. The sun has dropped now, and the foyer is heavy with shadows. The floor is smooth and unblemished. The stain was just a trick of the light, right? It must have been. The crying is much louder now, as if the woman in the downstairs room has moved closer to the door. You bend and pick up the piece of paper from the floor. It's stiff and waxy, 6 inches by 4. You turn it over and realize it's a tarot card from a beautiful hand-drawn deck. The image on it is so lifelike, so familiar. You raise it closer to your eyes. But then you hear a turning of the knob. The door across the hall opens. You look up and see a figure standing in the doorway. Her eyes are stains in the fabric of the house. The knot in your chest finally slips, and a single sob escapes your open mouth. You know you've come home.
Palimpsest, created by Jamieson Ridenhour and Haley Henninger. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to our little spooky soiree here. My name is Jamieson Ridenhour. This is Haley Henninger you've been listening to for the past 10 or 15 minutes. We are the team behind Palimpsest. I'm going to assume that you have an idea of who we are if you've decided to tune in and listen to us, but if not, we are a bi-weekly serialized audio drama about memory, identity, and the things that haunt us. Each one of our seasons is a self-contained story of 10 episodes with a single character voiced by Haley. And we are towards the end of our third season right now. And in a few minutes, we're going to do the most recent episode of season 3, which is the next to last episode. And we're also going to talk a little bit about what happens, or at least who happens, in the finale of that season. But I want to start by saying something about what you just heard. Every season of Palimpsest takes place in the same house. That house isn't always in the same geographical location. It's never in the same time period. We've been in 2016, 1897, and 1941 so far. And I've got a sense of where we're going to be in the future. But it's always the same house. And so what you just heard was a little tour of the Palimpsest house. We just thought we'd walk you through it as a sort of haunted real estate listing and show you what might be there. And hopefully you caught some Easter eggs referring to some things that you may have seen in the house before. And hopefully you heard some things that you didn't recognize that maybe you'll see in the future. I want to thank the White Horse Black Mountain. We are in one of my favorite venues in the world. I've played on this stage as a guitarist many, many, many times with my son, our composer, Ian Ridenhour, who wrote all the music you've been listening to. This is our home venue, sort of. Bob Hinkle, who just introduced us, has run this place for 10 years now, Bob? 12 years now. And it's my favorite listening room anywhere. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for supporting us and supporting the White Horse. If you want to support us and the White Horse even more, you can do a couple of things. You can go to whitehorselive.tips. It's whitehorselive, one word, .tips. And you can probably figure out what you do when you get to whitehorselive.tips. You can leave some tips for us there. You can also go to whitehorseblackmountain.com, which is maybe where you're actually watching this right now, and see the list of amazing live-streamed shows that Bob has put together. We're being filmed tonight by Rad House Productions, who are just a bunch of badasses. This is an amazing setup here. It looks good, as I assume you're seeing. And it sounds great. We have Claire Hoke on sound. It's a really lovely thing to be here and to speak out into this empty room, but I know I'm actually speaking to people. And you can also go check us out. Our website is www.thepalimpsestpodcast.com, and you can find merch and all kinds of stuff there. What we're about to do is episode 309. Of our current season. I'm going to give you the story so far. So if you haven't caught completely up, if you haven't gotten at least up through episode 308, you won't be completely lost. The final episode of the season happens this coming Tuesday, September 1st. Is our final episode, and it will be complete at that point. So if you've been waiting to binge the whole season, then you're. I just kicked a bottle of water over with my foot, but the cap is on it, Michael, so we're good.
At least you didn't spill wine all over your script.
Yes. So you'll be ready to binge at that point. I've got some announcements to make, and I've been telling people on social media that we were going to make some announcements about the season finale tonight, and so I want to do that without further ado. As you're about to see, things get rather heated and sort of fatalistically final for our heroine, Josie Waters, in this episode you're about to hear, the episode that dropped about a week and a half ago, 309. You may be wondering how we can possibly have a further episode, since Josie has been writing letters. That's what you've been listening to this whole season. And well, as you're about to see, she's left in a place where the writing of letters might be something that she's not able to do anymore. So we're going to have to need some other voices to come in and help tell the end of Josie's story. I don't want to tell you how we do that because I want that to surprise you. We're pretty proud of what happens in episode 310. And one of the things that we're proudest of is that I just went down a wish list of actors to ask them if they wanted to be in this episode, and they all said yes. So in addition to Haley's voice, which happens briefly in episode 310, you're also going to be hearing James Oliva Jen Sugden and Beth Eyre. If you don't know them, you should really go find them. James Oliva has been in, I don't know, hundreds of audio dramas, it feels like, but you probably know him best from Greater Boston and from his own show, What the Frequency. Jen Sugden is the writer of one of my favorite podcasts of all time, Victoriosity, which is a comedy steampunk set in a place called Greater London, which is the just alternative version of London in the 19th century. Terribly funny, terribly well done, hugely high production values and great writing. Jen Sugden is going to be with us. And then Beth Eyre is just a powerhouse. She'll be sort of the star of 310. And you likely know her as Antigone Funn in the London-based podcast sitcom called Wooden Overcoats, which is about two competing funeral home directors in the small town of Piffling Vale in England. One thing that COVID has done is sort of tightened us in, but also spread us out. We've been recording remotely. This is the first time Haley and I have been in the same space together since the second week of March. And James came to us from LA, and Jen's in Oxford, and Beth's in London, and we'll all be together on the Palimpsest feed this Tuesday. We're really excited. Please join us for that. Josephine Waters is an American codebreaker living in London in 1941. She worked for about 8 months for Bletchley Park, which is the code-breaking arm of the British government, before she was dismissed. Major spoilers for season 3 coming right now. Josie was dismissed because she did break a code. She broke a pretty important code and found out ahead of time about the bombing of a small village called Hawthorne, which she reported to her superiors. Her superiors ignored the warning. They didn't want the Germans to know they had broken the code, so they allowed Hawthorne to be bombed. Josie got a little hysterical at that and was unceremoniously kicked out of Bletchley Park. She went to London, where she stayed in a boarding house, the same house she just got a tour of in Home Again, with Mrs. Bowen, her landlady, and Mrs. Irving, another older woman who reads tarot cards, who lives in the rooms across from her upstairs in the house. When Josie was 16, she got pregnant and gave the baby up for adoption, something she's regretted ever since. As the war takes over the world, she becomes concerned for the fate of her child, whose name she doesn't even know, and she begins to write a series of letters, and that's what our season has been. Each episode is a letter that Josie writes to her unnamed, unknown child, a son she knows, where she tells him a bizarre story. She has begun to see the spirits of the dead in London. At first, they're the dead of the war, people who have been bombed or died from bombs, soldiers with bullet holes. Then she begins to see a woman who has jumped into the Thames, committed suicide, small children, and then older dead, plague victims, people from wars in the past. They see her, she sees them, they speak to her, and then they fade away. She doesn't know why, but Josie's rational. She's a coach, she's a mathematician. She just stopped short of her PhD in cryptology from Cornell before she was recruited to Bletchley Park. She knows that the world is logical, and that this isn't something that can be happening, so she sets to figuring it out in her letters. She talks on paper to discover it. She's also being followed. She's being followed by a man named Ramsay Whately Campbell, who she meets. He tells her that he knows who she is and where she has worked. This disturbs her because it's supposed to be top secret. He also tells her, eventually, that he's the head of a cult whose name she can't pronounce or even quite understand when he says it, and that they know how to stop the war. They've already tried once, and it failed. They had the wrong translation of the thing they were using to try to stop the war, and that's one of the reasons that the ghosts are walking the streets. It's one of the reasons the ghosts are drawn to Josie, because they know she can break the code. She can translate the small leather spell book that Ramsay Campbell hands her. And he asks her if she'll help, if she'll let them into the secrets of the code in this spell book so that they can stop the war. She does. She's conflicted about it, but she translates it. The spell supposedly is going to raise a being called the Oldest, and the Oldest will transform the world. Not in a good way, she suspects, but definitely in the war. While she's trying to decide what she's going to do about this information that she's privy to, the government catches up with her. They're worried that she might spill some of the secrets that she learned when she was at Bletchley Park. She has a couple of encounters with them. During one of them, she pulls a gun on the government agent and tells him to get the hell out of her yard. And that probably wasn't the smartest move on her part. They come back later. This is episode 308. Two men come, they force their way into the house, and they accidentally shoot and kill Mrs. Bowen, the elderly landlady, while Josie watches. Josie's response, she doesn't know why, is to read the first spell out of the spell book, which is in her hand when she sees that happen. And it raises an indescribable creature that eradicates the two men and leaves nothing in its wake, leaves no trace behind in the foyer of the house, just the body of Mrs. Bowen who's been shot. And that's where we begin now. Episode 309, Ritual.
Burying the body took less time than I would have thought. Mrs. Bowen was not a large woman, and the victory garden behind the house made for easy digging. I cleaned the hallway as best I could, though mopping the blood was an imperfect task, and I'm afraid there will always be a stain there. After 45 minutes, I had everything as close to normal as could be, and I rang Whately Campbell. Or at least, I rang Whately Campbell's number. A woman answered, possibly Irene Nesmith, though I could have gotten the voice wrong. She told me that Whately Campbell was expecting me to call, and that if I had decoded the book, they would send someone to collect it. I told her that things had become more complicated, and that I wasn't willing to give them the book. Then I hung up. It only took 4 minutes for Whately Campbell himself to call back. Before he could remonstrate with me, I told him I would give him the translation if I was allowed to be part of the summoning. "Whatever do you mean?" he asked. "We don't have time for you to be coy," I said. "You told me the book would explain, and it has. You are going to summon the Oldest in order to stop the war. I want to be part of the ritual." "You are full of surprises, Miss Waters," he said. I said, "Tell me where to go." He gave me directions and a time well past curfew. I told him I would be there, and I hung up. But so much has happened since then. I'm outside the Tottenham Court Tube station, waiting for Simon to come back. I hope I have time to get this all down before he gets here and we return to the tunnels. Everything starts then. They'll have the sacrifice secured, and all they need are the right words at the right time. I have those in the book. Even now, right at the end, I still don't know if I'm going to do what they want. I can only believe that these spells are real. I saw their effect on the government agents who killed Mrs. Bowen. But I'm the only one who can read the book. I could throw the whole thing if I wanted. I can stop them, or I can call down the Oldest. It's up to me, and I don't know what I'm going to do. Either way, it's the end.
Episode 309, Ritual.
I've given all my other letters to Mrs. Irving and told her that I'll post this one to her once it's done. She promised she'd keep them for me. The idea of you ever finding them, finding her, is impossible. I know that now. But somehow it still feels important that I finish the story, as far as I can. I need to tell you. It matters. Mrs. Irving was shaken by what she had seen, but not as much as I would have thought. Perhaps her dabblings in the occult are more than dabblings, or perhaps the keep calm and carry on spirit is much stronger than I give it credit for. I gave her the letters and told her how important they were to me, and I told her that if I didn't come back in a few days, that she can have the few belongings in my room. I have no idea what will happen to the house with Mrs. Bowen gone, but that's probably not going to be a problem until her grandson returns from the war. And either way, it won't be my problem. I didn't tell Mrs. Irving everything, but I did warn her that the government was after me, and she said she was worried and would keep the doors locked and shuttered. "It's the tower card," she said. "It told us this was coming." She also told me that based on what she'd seen, they had better watch themselves if they were coming for me. She's right. Waitley Campbell told me to meet them in an alley off the Charing Cross Road at 10 p.m. I wore a dark dress and the most unassuming hat I own, wrapped in a scarf around my head. I would have worn my sunglasses, but that would look even more suspicious. I had a vague idea that if I was questioned about breaking curfew, that I could just plead ignorance, so I wanted to look as normal as possible. I hoped I wouldn't have to test that. I took a small purse, just large enough for my service revolver and the spell book. Mrs. Irving saw me to the door at 9. "Do be careful, Josie," she said. And then she embraced me. It was the first time Mrs. Irving has ever touched me beyond patting my hand during a tarot card reading. Her eyes were full of tears. I felt very strongly how alone she was going to be. And then I walked off the porch into the grass, hearing the bolt slide home in the door behind me. I stopped briefly under the oak tree and looked back at the house. The window of the rooms I had spent the past few months in were dark, and I felt a dread certainty that I would never see any of this again. I was aware of the cold night air against my skin and the weight of the book in my handbag. I left the garden and moved down the road towards the park. I had not been out past curfew since arriving in London. More than the emptiness, the thing that struck me was the darkness. The blackout was total, and the silent streets nearly invisible beneath my feet. The occasional outline of a blackout curtain, backlit by lamplight, was the only sign that I wasn't the only living thing in the city. I saw 2 wardens, but in the dark it was easy to slip into an alley or a doorway, and they never saw me. I passed Hyde Park and turned onto Oxford Street. As I did so, the moon appeared from behind a cloud. It was full, or nearly so, and in the absence of the streetlights, it cast an eerie sheen over the buildings and trees. It made me think again of the Wolfman. It was exactly the sort of moon that would have transformed Lon Chaney into a monster. Even someone who is pure at heart, the movie said, can become a wolf when the moon is full and bright. During the film, I had felt afraid for the woman, chased through the forest by the half-man, half-wolf. But now, walking the darkened streets of this haunted city, I felt no fear at all. I was the wolf. So when I saw the figure standing on the street corner, my impulse was not to run, but to fight. I reached in my handbag, seeking not my gun, but the book. Nothing could stand against what it held. But then I realized I had nothing to worry about. The person on the moonlit corner was dead. He waited for me, and as I passed, he fell into step with me. He looked to be about 14, with gray, ashen skin, barefoot on the cold pavement. He was wearing... It doesn't matter. I don't need to tell you what he was wearing, because you know. I recognized your eyes because they were mine, just as I had imagined. I should have been devastated, but it felt inevitable. And it felt so good to be with you, at last. I wanted to speak to you, to ask you so many things, but then we weren't alone. As I walked, the dead joined us. They emerged from side streets and alleys. They climbed from bomb craters and walked out of the underground stations. They were not the historic dead I had been seeing. They were all new dead, people from now, dressed in contemporary clothes. Simple citizens, torn and damaged and bloody. I knew them, with the same certainty I'd felt about everything since Mrs. Bowen. These were the residents of Hawthorne, blown into ghosts by German bombs that I knew were coming. Blameless, unthinkable victims. They followed me as I moved through Soho, more and more of them. By the time I reached Charing Cross Road, there was a throng around me, a spectral tide that washed me forward, inexorable as time. Inexorable as time. We swept down the empty street, past darkened bookshelves and theaters, bookshops and theaters, silent except for the susurration of phantom feet. Cecil's Court was near Leicester Square, a short alleyway full of old books and antiques, shuttered and filled with shadow in the blackout. I reached it just before 10. Waitley Campbell was standing halfway down the alley, with Irene Nesmith and the man in a sailor clothes from the meeting at the tower. I stopped near them, alone now, but I knew you were with me. Waitley Campbell's voice was subdued, a curfewed whisper. Miss Waters, thank you for coming. You have the book? I showed him the book, but I did not relinquish it. I said, "It's the final spell you want, right? Summoning the oldest?" Everyone, including Waitley Campbell himself, stiffened like I'd said something dangerous. It was exactly the same reaction as soldiers at Bletchley Park if one of us talked about our work outside the huts. "It is," he said. "We had a different version from a different translation. A translation we discovered too late was flawed." "And that summoned the dead?" "Among other things," he said. And I remembered the thing that I had heard in the tube tunnels. "What's going to happen if it does what it should?" I asked. "We are somewhat pressed for time, Miss Waters," he said, and Irene Nesmith glanced nervously at the mouth of the alley. "What do we need for the spell?" I need to know what will happen, I said. How many people will die? He waved his hand. It's an irrelevant question. Since I won't share the translation unless you answer me, I find its relevance is heightened by context, I said. How many? I mean, the question can't be answered, he replied. When the oldest emerges, the world will change. He will usher in a new world order in which things like living and dying become meaningless. So, a large number. Miss Waters, why are you here if you don't intend to help us? The sailor stepped forward, not threateningly, but not unthreateningly. I sighed. You need darkness. You need candles. You need 7 knives wrapped 7 times with 7 cords. You need blood from each of the participants, though a token amount seems to be all that's required. You need the words I've translated, and you need a sacrifice, blameless and as young as possible. Irene Nesmith smiled. Thank you, dear, she said. We have all those things but one. Simon? She nodded at the sailor, who slipped out of the alley and faded into the shadows. I didn't ask where he'd gone. We've chosen a place where we won't be interrupted, Wheatley Campbell said. In the old days, they'd have found a cave or some other naturally occurring deep place. Luckily, the Passenger Transport Board has made things simpler for us. He led us back into the streets, and we retraced my route up Charing Cross Road to the Tottenham Court Underground. 3 other members of the group were waiting on us, the woman from the alley by the tower, and 2 men I had seen on the edge of the crater at Stamford Road. They followed us down the steps. We passed through the people sheltering on the platform, earning only a few curious looks as we slipped into the tunnels. It was cooler here, both because of the depth and darkness, and because of the chiller plant blowing its icy air into the tunnels. We walked for a few minutes in the dark, then Mrs. Nesmith pointed out a small opening in the wall, a service tunnel it looked like, that led away into the black. Once inside, Wheatley Campbell risked a torch. The service tunnel was narrow and stuffy, the walls too close to extend my arms. We followed it for several hundred yards, and it opened out into what appeared to be a natural cave, although it could be the beginning of a planned expansion that was abandoned when the war began. The space was roughly 15 feet by 20, hardly large, but big enough for what we needed. The group members began preparing. Mrs. Nesmith took a large number of butcher knives from her bag and passed them out around. Each of the others began wrapping cords around the handles, coarse cords like a thick twine, but dark and waxy. Wheatley Campbell handed one to me, already wrapped. If you wouldn't mind, Miss Waters, going back up to the entrance and waiting on Simon. He'll be here momentarily with our last participant, and then we can begin. So I'm here, outside the tube station, writing this final letter to you. There are ghosts in the streets, watching me, but I don't see you among them. I don't know where Simon has gone or how he's going to accomplish what he has to do, but I know he'll be returning with the sacrifice. What that means is he'll bring an innocent person, possibly a child, who we will use our knives to open up. As the innocent bleeds out, I'll read the words and we'll mingle our own blood, pricked with the bound knives, with that of the child. And then the oldest will rise from the summer isle and transform the world. I could stop it in 100 ways. I could read one word wrong and make it all go south. I still have my service revolver, and it has a bullet for each of the cultists, but I'd need to be fast and I couldn't miss once. And of course, I could just disappear, wander off into the darkened streets, throw the book into the Thames, and fly home to America tomorrow, assuming they haven't alerted the airports about me. I could figure out how to avoid the British government once I was home. Or I could do it. I could raise the oldest and end it all. The sacrifice isn't the sticking point. As I watch the hawthorn dead gathered in the street before me, I know there's already so much blood on my hands that a little more means almost nothing in the scheme of things. I know it was you, earlier, standing in Oxford Street, walking with me in the dark. And if you're here, if you're one of them, then you aren't. Safe isn't real. Solace isn't real. I only wanted to make the world safer, so I've been wrong from the beginning. I've always only been wrong. The sirens are starting, so the bombs are about to fall. We'll hear them as we bleed beneath the streets. That seems fitting. I wish you were here. You were here before, but I can't find you. I can't help you. What happened to you? What is this all for, if not for you? I see Simon coming up Oxford Street, holding a sleeping girl on his shoulder. She looks no more than 8. This is it. I'm going to post this to Mrs. Irving so she can keep it with the others. I still don't know what I'm going to do. I know it can't matter anymore, but it was all for you. I'm so sorry. Josie.
Palimpsest is written and produced by me, Jamieson Ridenhour. The voice of Josie is Haley Henninger. Our music is written and performed by Ian Ridenhour, and our graphic design is by Megan Lee. Thank you for joining us for this live stream show. I look forward to seeing what you have to say to us afterwards. I hope you enjoyed seeing us as well as hearing us. Please support the White Horse by going to whitehorseblackmountain.com and seeing the great lineup of live stream shows they've got coming for you. You can also go to whitehorselive.tips and show your appreciation in a tangible fashion. And you can also go to thepalimpsestpodcast.com where you can find all sorts of things, including written transcripts of the show. We also have a Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/palimpsest, you can join our Patreon group by becoming a monthly patron and get behind-the-scenes videos and list of Easter eggs and Q&As and fan art and all kinds of fun stuff. We'll be back on September 1st with episode 310 and the end of Josie's story. We really appreciate you listening. Thank you. Embrace what haunts you.
Thank you for joining us for White Horse Live with tonight's guests Jamieson Ridenhour and Haley Henninger, Palimpsest. This program is produced by White Horse Black Mountain and by Rad House Studio. Bob Hinkle is your host and executive producer. Claire Hoke is audio engineer. Jessica Wharton is director of photography. Michael Stevens is network engineer. Jessica Fox is key grip. Public relations services provided by Maggie Rainwater at Hoosier Devil. I'm Rebecca Hillgraves, director and producer for these programs. Join us next Friday night at 8 p.m. Eastern for Abby the Spoon Lady and the Tater Boys, right here on White Horse Live. In the meantime, be good to each other, and that includes all people.